Welcome to Stage Dive, a podcast where we go deep on the art of live performance to help artists perform better on stage. I am your host, Jack Dawkins. I am a rapper, poet, and storyteller out of Boulder, Colorado. Our guest this evening is Brandon Guzman. He is an actor, singer, and rapper originally from Florida, and most recently he's been part of a traveling company performing in original plays intended to introduce and celebrate his Mexican heritage with young students throughout the southwestern United States. His show last year was called The Guava Tree, and you can get that soundtrack on Spotify right now, and the current production is called Casa Alfonsa, and that is also going to be available on Spotify in the near future. We talk about his goals as an actor, his techniques for nailing his memorization, and the why that keeps him motivated even on his off days. It was a beautiful conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Brandon, I'm so excited to meet you. I'm so excited that you're in Colorado because I'm also in Colorado. Cool. Wasn't expecting that, so curveball. Although, like, Boulder is not big, Creed is very, very small.
Yes.
So, and were you in Florida before you got to Creed?
Yes, I was.
So can you tell the story of how one might go from Creed, or rather from Florida to Creed, Colorado?
Well, my funny story is the day I got this job was because I was doing this job last year as well, which is a musical tour. It's an original show that gets written by our creative person who is a playwright. Her name is Diana Grozensky. And then also the composer, who is Emiliano. And they both collaborate and they create this musical that gets directed by somebody. And then we have a 4-week process of rehearsal / performing. And then after that, we go on tour. So when I first got this job, I was currently in New York and I was just auditioning consistently. And I saw it popped up on Playbill and they were looking for Judd in Oklahoma and Daddy Warbucks in Annie. And so I was like, oh, I have something recorded. I'll just submit it and not worry about it. At the time I was working at Target in 34th Street in Herald Square. And so I didn't think anything of it. And it was like a week later and I get an email and they're like, hey, we're interested in you for this track. Can you please send us a video of you singing your favorite song and then also recording these sides? And so luckily I had the next day off. So what I did, I completely memorized it and I recorded myself because I didn't have anybody to read the sides with me. So I just timed it perfectly so that I was like reading it and I waited a little bit and then read it again and then waited. And so then I played it out loud so that it would be like a different person while I was doing the sides. And then after that, they got back to me within 30 minutes and they're like, thank you so much. We'll be in contact with you soon. Later on, it was like a Thursday and they're like, hey, we're interested for an interview. We want to talk about the tour, what it's like to live in a little small town in the middle of nowhere. They're like, are you interested? And I was like, yes, I'd love that. So we have the interview and it went really well. And the funny thing is I still remember to this day, I talked to my two bosses basically. And I was like, do you guys still remember my interview? And they're like, yeah. And we thought it was so funny what you said. And what I had said was they asked me if I had any questions. And I said, yes, did I get the job? And they both started laughing. And they were like, not quite yet. You're one of the finalists, but we will be letting you know within the weekend. And so I waited and I got the job. I had gotten to understudy both of those parts. And then I got to be in the tour, but it was 2020. So it didn't happen. And so I got postponed to 2021. The 2 other parts that I had gotten got swiped away because they didn't have the money or they couldn't do it because of COVID as well. So we ended up doing the tour last year and it toured all through New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Kansas. And they loved my team and they wanted my whole team to come back and they had offered us to return. And I was like, I would love to do that. And so when I was in Florida before I came to Creed, I had just... I was currently in Mexico, actually, and they had did a little FaceTime meeting if I was still interested and if I would like to do it and what it entailed. And I was like, yes, of course. And this year I actually got to be in the actual season, and I also got to be in the tour. So in the regular season, this place is known as Creed Repertory Theater, and repertory means that shows are consistently being done on top of each other. So in the morning, there could be one show, and then at night, there'll be another show. And then the next day, there'll be another show and another show, and it just keeps going back and forth. So what I was doing is I was in the show called Native Gardens, and I would rehearse, and then once the show opened, around the time of August, so I got here in May, and around the time of August is when they started rehearsals. So I would be in rehearsal in the morning, and then I'd be doing a show at night, and then until the tour started. Yeah.
I have so many questions, hopefully. Okay. So first, I want to be a little bit forensic and move backward. Yep. So like the process you described, it's like a lot of chance encounters, right? Like you were in New York, you were working in Herald Square, you had applied for these things that you saw online. They were like, hey, actually, we have this other thing. Why don't you try for that? And it ended up being this traveling thing, blah, blah, blah. But like my understanding is that that's actually pretty common for like how careers are formed in the world of acting. Like it's rarely like this. It's usually more like that. Has that been your experience?
For the most part, it's been both, actually, because sometimes it is just like whatever you apply for is what you get. And sometimes you apply for something and they're like, actually, we'd like to have you for this as well, or have you for this instead. And so it can go either way.
That's awesome. Do you find that you have a preference? Like, is it more fun when it's kind of like, I applied, I got it, I'm done? Or when it's like, who knows? Like the rabbit hole goes deep. We'll see where I land.
It all depends. So if it's a musical or a play that I know, it's more fun whenever you apply for the part and you get the part. But if it's for something that's completely random and new, or like I've never heard of it, like it's always fun to like go through the process, because then you're like learning the parts and stuff whenever it comes to the sides and the monologues that they want you to memorize. And then if you do get the part, then you see how it all comes together. If you don't get that part, you're like, oh, so that's what I got called for, and oh, that makes sense.
Oh, that's so interesting. How would you describe the type of role you find yourself attracted to?
I love playing either something very heavily Hispanic or Latinx oriented, or I also love playing the lead or the villain. The villain is always fun. Some of my dream roles, it's so funny because whenever people ask me what my dream is, like, or what my end goal is, it's always been to be the first Mexican Phantom on Broadway, and I would love to do that. And also the first Mexican Sweeney Todd on Broadway. That would be amazing.
Dope. How did your affinity for playing the villain develop? Like, how did that come to be?
It was probably through like high school. In high school, I played the villain a lot. But I also got to play the leading part a lot too. And same in college, I got to play the leads, and I also got to play the villain. So it was tossed between the both. And honestly, I could go either way, whether I play like the good guy or the villain. But usually the villains have like the best songs, and like they have like great character development, and they get to do the fun stuff on stage.
Yeah. You don't strike me as a particularly mean person or someone who's very evil generally. So like, can you talk to me about the process of stepping into that? Or like, again, I'm projecting here, but what I assume is maybe not your normal nature. Like, what do you do to prepare to step into that?
I'm a very happy-go-lucky person, so I'm always smiling. I'm always very friendly. I like making friends with people all the time. So whenever it comes to those kinds of roles, I have to like, throughout the rehearsal process, I like learn the part and like I do the things. But whenever it comes to like actually being in the show, I tend to like separate myself when the show is going on, but after or before, I'm very friendly still. But during the show, I tend to like put myself in that character's shoes and stay in it. So like if that person is very like isolated and they don't like involve themselves with anybody else in the show, I tend to like back away and like keep to myself. And then like when I'm on stage and stuff, or like if I die, like I'm back, it's me again, you know. And I tend to do that because it helps just to get in that mindset and to like try to become as real as you can when it comes to playing those parts. So it doesn't come off as acting. You're living in the moment.
Yeah. I was going to ask, do you ever use like memories from your own life, from personal experience to kind of pull yourself into that emotional space? Or do you really try and stay within the stories of the character?
I do a little bit of both, depending on what character or what kind of situation it is. I've known that like if you try to use like your dead dog, it only works for so long until it doesn't work anymore. And sometimes using that a lot, like if it's like a family member or something, it can get to a really dark place and it's not healthy. So I tend to not do that as much. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. You were mentioning, like back in high school, back in college, you got to play the lead and you got to play the villain. So you got some reps with both of those. But like, where did the appetite for acting start? Like, was this like out of the womb? You were like, I am an actor. That's what I do. Or like, was there a moment when you're like, oh, I think this is actually something I'd really love to do?
It's a funny story. So like, I didn't know what I wanted to do as a kid. When I was in 5th grade, there was this thing that happened, and like they asked all the students before they went into middle school what they wanted to do. And like, I always told my mom that I wanted to be a Marine because I would see the commercials of like when they're like climbing up the rocks and they're like the proud, the few, the Marine. And I was like, that looks so cool. I want to do that. And my mom's like, no, you are not doing that. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, maybe I want to be a cook and like do like cooking and stuff. And she's like, okay, cool. And then I finally went to middle school in this little school called Manatee School for the Arts, which is a middle school and a high school. And in 6th grade, I got to explore all the arts. So in 6th grade, they made me take dance, art, graphic design, painting, and theater, and music as well. And so in my theater class, the first thing that we did, the teacher introduced himself. His name was Mr. Bajali. And he was like, okay, so you guys are going to write a play, and you're going to cast the people in your class, and then you're going to perform it for everybody. And I was like, what are we doing? I was like, okay, this sounds cool. So like I wrote this little play, wrote it out. It was like 5 pages tops. Went around my class and I was like, do you want to play this part? Do you want to play this part? And so we did it. And I was hooked. I was like, oh my God, this is like playing. I was like, and then like I asked him, I was like, people get paid to do this? He's like, yeah. And I was like, whoa. Like, as a 6th grader, I don't know anything. And so, as that class went on, I got more and more hooked, and we were constantly writing like little plays and then performing them. And so from after that, in 6th grade, in 7th grade, I took theater again. In 8th grade, I took theater again. And then when I got into high school, I started taking acting. And in 9th grade, they had a little variety show. And my mom always tried to push me to sing because she sings and she gets her talents from my grandpa, who sings and plays the guitar, who gets his talents from his dad as well. So it's been like a little trickle down. And so my mom has always tried to get me to sing. She's like, you should sing, blah, 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 blah. And so this little variety show happened, and I wanted to sing and rap because I was very interested in rap as well. And so I hit up one of my friends who was really close to me that sang all the time, and she knew that I rap and sang. So we did this song called Knock You Down by Neo and Carrie Hilson and Kanye. And so that's what we auditioned with, and the teacher who was running it loved it. And so she was like, oh, yes, definitely. She's like, would you guys be interested in being the MCs? And we're like, oh, my God, yeah, of course. And so that was like the little spark that happened for me, and I got to rap and sing for everybody, and I was hooked. And so the next year, I heard that they were going to do West Side Story. And I was like, if I really want to be an actor, I need to start auditioning for plays, and I need to start like doing the thing. And I remember I asked my teacher about it, and she was like, yeah, she's like, do you see yourself as like a gang member, or do you see yourself as the leader of the gang member? And like, I was like, I don't know. I was like, I could see myself as the leader. She's like, well, have you ever seen the show? And I was like, no. And she's like, well, go home, see it, and then audition for it this weekend. And I was like, okay, cool. So I went home, watched West Side Story, and I was like, oh, I want to be Bernardo. That's who I want to be. And so I went, I auditioned, I got a call back. During the callback process, I found out that there were sides. So during class, I was not paying attention in class. I was memorizing my sides. So when it came time to the audition, I was basically off book. And so when I was doing the callback, I was the one that was like getting called back up to go with different people, and like they were testing me out. And the next day I found out that I had gotten it. And like throughout that process, I fell in love with it. The next year I did Oklahoma. I got to play Judd, and like it just kept rolling, and I just kept loving it more and more and more. And here I am now.
That's awesome. I think you may have just described it, but, and I'll give more context to my question. I think, like you mentioned restaurants and cooking, like you can be a cook and then you can be a chef. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a certain point when you sort of step into the identity of like, I'm not just someone who is cooking, like this is my profession, this is my calling. Mm-hmm. For you, like when was the moment you feel like you became an actor? Like when you felt like you were wearing that identity and really feeling it?
I don't know. I mean, because like I've always considered myself an actor, and it was so funny because like when I was in high school and middle school and even college, like people would like kind of laugh at it, And it wasn't until like I got my first paying gig that I was like, I'm an actor. This is me. I'm an actor.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Wait, and so for that variety show, were you Neo? Were you Kanye?
I was both. So I got to sing the Neo and the Kanye part. And then my friend Christina, she sang the Carrie Hilson part.
Strong. And so like, where does music sit now within like the context of all the pursuits that you're in?
It's very close to me. Actually this summer, throughout like high school all the way till now, I've always like considered myself a rapper. And so like I record and like I write lyrics. I consider myself a lyricist too, because all the things that I rap, I write myself. And so ever since then I've been recording, and I have a SoundCloud. I upload my stuff. I'm actually working on a song with a friend of mine who's releasing an EP on Spotify, and they wanted me to be featured in their music, and they're the ones that are doing the chorus and the outro and the intro, and I'm the one that's going to be rapping the verses. And they told me that I have creative liberty and I can write whatever I want. They just told me that the theme was like about the tour life, and I was like, perfect, I could come up with a ton of stuff with that. But yeah, this summer, me and one of the other actors that was in the company as well, we recorded a total of 3 songs. We found instrumentals on YouTube that were free, and we each wrote our own verse, and then we recorded it in his room. And like a lot of people have liked them, and they're on Spotify. But yeah, I continue to be involved with music a lot. I love music so much.
Super cool. Amazing that music is so present, and you're going to get music that's coming out on Spotify. That's awesome. Like, I want to get a little bit more into like the performance pieces. So I'm curious, like, for you, is performing like a single verb, as in like when I'm performing, that's an energy and I step into it, or like the way I perform music, the way I act, like those are different energies? Like, what does it mean to perform for you?
I never really thought about it, but like thinking about it now, I think they are 2 different energies, because when I act and like sing, it's a whole different category than when I rap, just because like you have to like, not like put on like a persona, but you kind of do when you're a rapper. You can't just be like, oh, I'm gonna rap, I mean there is rappers that do that, like Lil Dicky, like he, like that's his own thing and that's incredible. But like, yep. I like grew up on like very lyrical rap, so like I like love like heavy lyrics with lots of meaning and stuff. So like I would say like when it comes to performing like as a whole, I think it's like all one, because like for me, like whether it's like singing with a jazz band or performing for a musical or doing a play or rapping, it's all the same bubble. And to me, as long as I'm doing one of those, I'm happy. So I would say that I see them all as a whole for sure.
Yeah. I want to dig deeper into like who you get excited about in rap. So like these are 2 separate questions. One is like who is just, and like I know it's always hard to pick best or favorite, but like what artist do you come back to regularly? Do you kind of like always have in rotation? And then separately, when you are rapping, who do you think you most sound like, or what kind of like, who are you close to sonically? That was repetitive, but it's fine.
Yeah. For music wise, I have 4 favorite rappers. It's Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Kanye, and Tyler, the Creator. I love them, their music. Kanye, but like I love their music, just the music. Yep. But when it comes to like sounding like, I find myself like whenever I write, sometimes I lean in towards like the Kendrick or the J. Cole, but sometimes I also hear myself leaning in towards like the Kanye, like that old, like late registration era, like that type of rap. And so like it's a mixture of like all three for sure.
Yeah. And then content-wise, like, are you more of a conscious lyricist? Do you rap about your life? Do you tell stories? Like, where do you find yourself gravitating toward?
I lean towards both of those, actually. I like to tell stories. For the songs that I recently made, they were stories about my past. And also I like to talk about, like, what's going on as well in my life as well.
And when you're rapping, how would you describe because I totally understand what you're saying, and that, like, you're not putting up a front, but there is, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there's definitely an energy that you lean into or step into when you're rapping. Like,
yes.
What adjectives would you use to describe that energy for you?
No, yeah, for sure. I feel like I lean, like, it's like a whole, like, body shift. Cause like when you're singing, like, you know, you move around and it's very fluid. And sometimes when you rap, like, it's very hands and, like, your chest is puffed up and, like, you know, you want to, like, seem, like, not tough, but, like, tough, if that makes sense, you know? And even, like, if, like, I'm alone or, like, when I'm recording, I still, like, move my hands around and stuff, even though no one's looking at me. Like, it still comes out.
Emotionally, energetically, what are you channeling when you're like, all right, I'm shifting to rap now?
Yeah, I shift, like it might make sense to me, or maybe it'll make sense to you, but whenever I think like in a color, like, and I think like of a darker color, so like navy blue and like dark green and like maroon, like I think of like that, and like my voice always drops as well. I like tend to rap lower than like if I were to rap higher, so like my voice also shifts as well. And sometimes I've noticed, like, sometimes I sound completely different than what I normally sound like when I'm speaking or singing when I rap.
And was that like a process or an energy that developed over time? Or was that something that sort of organically sort of emanated, came out of you?
Very organic. It just kind of happened. And I guess it's like from like listening to rap, like the tonality of every rapper that I listen to tends to lean towards like a deeper or like in the middle speaky, you know? So like that's also why.
Yeah. You mentioned Tyler, the Creator, who is like, has an incredibly unique sound. Like, I'm curious, are there elements of his music that you like to pull from? Or is it just more so like, I just appreciate him as an artist and I think he's dope?
I love him as an artist. He's incredible. Everything that he's released, like, has been so different, and like it's like little new things. The things that I do pull from him is when he has the triplet action in his lyrics, which is very common with like mumble rap recently, but like he does it in such a way that it's not just you know, like it's just
right.
Like it has its own unique flow. And also like the way he goes into like dark areas, or he also goes into sections that like people won't usually rap about. That's also where he influences me, because sometimes I rap about stuff that people usually don't rap about as well.
Can you give an example?
Can I give an example? There was this one song that I wrote when I was in New York, and it was in a really dark time in my life. And so like I just sat in my room. I was all alone, and like I was just writing the lyrics down. They just came to my mind, like they were just spewing out of me. So like I just started typing on my phone as fast as I possibly could, and like I was going and going and going, and I was like, oh, and like I had already bought the beat that I wanted to use for it, and the little image on it had like a little like demon or devil on it, and I was like kind of want to lean towards that when I rap about that. So like I want to lean towards that dark side. And so like the song literally starts, I'm about to go biblical, lyrical, spiritual, open up your mind as I'm about to go biblical. And so like it's already like starting like you know, like dark or like spiritualist. And so like I was going and going, and out of nowhere I like felt something touch my back, and I was like, whoa. I was like, okay. I was like, maybe I should stop. And as I turned around, I was like, what the heck touched my back? And it was this giant roach. And take in mind, like, I'm in the 5th floor, and like the windows are completely closed. There's nothing out there. And like it had flew in through the window somehow, through like a tiny little crack, but it was like huge. And it had touched me, and I was like, oh God. I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go to bed. But like I felt like I was going too dark. So then I stepped away from it. But I ended up finishing the song the next day, and I recorded it within 2 days after that.
Super cool. That's such a New York story.
It's like everything about it.
Yeah.
It's like the darkness, the fifth floor, the roach, like all very fitting. That's amazing. Just for fun, like, so you mentioned like you want to be the first Latino or Latinx Phantom, you want to be the first Latinx Sweeney Todd. Like, if you hold that as a vision, or like you could be the next Kendrick, you could be the next J. Cole, like, could you pick one? Ooh. If you had to choose?
I mean, there was a time where like I was battling myself and like thinking of like whether I could do both, and that was at a time where like musical theater and like rap hadn't blended as well as it's blending now. But I was like, maybe I can go under the rap name Anonymous and just release the music, and if it happens to blow up, it'll be under that rapper name, like Anonymous. It would just be anonymous. No one would know who I was. It would just be the music. And I was like, and if it blows up, you know, and it could be like a whole thing like Gorillaz where like you never get to see who the person is, but you know the music. And so I thought about that, and I was like, I don't know. Because like another thing as well is like sometimes when like you're like a rapper, like you wouldn't be like respected, I think, in the musical theater world. And then the same goes for like if you're like a very musical theater person, people are gonna be like, oh really, you rap? Do you really rap? You know? And so like it was a very split off, but if I had to choose, I would definitely lean more towards the acting, performing, and being the first of those for sure.
Super interesting. Like, and you may not have a sense, but like, do you have a sense of why there's that like interdisciplinary tension between theater and rap? I'm just curious if you have a sense of like why that exists.
Because like, so like rap does exist in musical theater now because of like Hamilton and In the Heights and like all the new musicals that are coming out, and it's very different rap. Like it's not rap. Like it's they're doing the motions, they're doing the thing where they're being lyricists and rapping, but like there's always like that little thing that I feel like there's just something missing, that it's just not the same. In the sense of like why they might not blend is just because like when it comes to like real rap, like sometimes the topics are money, hoes, cars, killing people, like all that stuff, and sometimes that doesn't blend with what they're doing, you know. So that's why like I feel like there's that split for sure.
Yeah, I imagine like there's also there's an element of authenticity, right? Because I think like something that's so core to hip hop, to rap, is that you're telling your stories. Like there's some storytelling of like a fiction, but for the most part, it's like, this is my lived experience and how I express it. So if you're on Broadway or you're in a play, by definition, you are acting. You are trying to tell a different person's story. You're in a different context, a different world. And like separating that authenticity from that art form, again, like it just hasn't happened much. Or when it happens, like it's not that Hamilton isn't great in its own way, but to your point, it's different. It doesn't hit the same way. Yeah. What's it like touring? Because like touring for a music artist is kind of like a van and driving between lots of small cities and venues. Like, how long are you in one place? How many shows do you do? What's the travel like? Where do you live when you're sort of in between? Like, what does that all look like?
Yeah, so for touring with this show and the show last year, so like I said, the process all takes place, like the rehearsal takes place in Creed. And then the first week right after rehearsals, they call it out and backs. So we're staying still here in Creed and providing housing that they provide for us. And we go to schools nearby and like maybe 2 shows or 1 show that day. And we do the performance, we go to the next school, and then we come back home. And that's the first week. After that, for me, for my team, because there's 2 teams, there's a team blue and the team pink. And for my team, we went to Denver after that. So we were in Denver for a week, and we did a total of 8 shows. So that was like 2 and 1 mixed in throughout the days. And so we tour in a van as well, like this big giant white van. We have all the set on there and all of our belongings as well. We get to stay in Airbnbs that are paid for and looked for by the company the theater company, and they plan this. So they start planning for this tour around like this time, and then in January, like last year. So they start calling schools and asking them where they want. And so they start making this huge map of where it would be convenient for one team to be doing these performances and the other team to be doing these performances because of scheduling and time and whatever it may be. And so we're constantly going. We try to stay in one location. So like, say I was just in Arizona literally this past week, like this week that just happened. And I was also in New Mexico. So I got to New Mexico. I was in Farmington is where I stayed, but I performed in Kirkland, I think it was called. And it was in this giant theater, and the schools came to the theater and we performed there, and we had 2 shows, and then we came back. And then we went to Arizona. We drove 4 hours, and then we stayed in Flagstaff, and we were there throughout the rest of the week. And so we stayed in Flagstaff, and the shows were just like a few minutes away from the location where we were staying. But sometimes, like when we were in Kansas, I was in Kansas for a whole 5 weeks. And we had 2 places where we stayed. We stayed in Moreland, and all the shows were either like an hour to an hour and a half away from where we were staying. And then when we switched, we were in Cortland, and then the same thing went, and we were like an hour to an hour and a half away from the places we were performing.
Oh, that's super interesting. Mm-hmm. You said like we go perform at schools. What type of school? Like college, elementary, middle, high?
So this is a children's show. It's intended for the ages of K through 5. It's a musical, like I told you. It's written to be performed, and it's half in Spanish and half in English. And we take it to these rural areas, and we also take it to heavy Hispanic areas for 2 reasons. The rural areas is to bring arts and theater to places that wouldn't be exposed to that kind of situation, and also bringing different culture to them, because a lot of the schools in Kansas are primarily white. And then also for schools that are heavily Hispanic, because we want them to see that, yes, you too can also be an actor. As you can see, someone that looks like you is on stage portraying something that you could do.
So cool. Mm-hmm. And I assume that's somewhat baked into the mission statement of the theater company that organizes all this?
Yes.
Or is that okay?
Yeah, so this tour, it's called the YOUT Tour, the Young Audience Outreach Tour, and it's going on its 40th anniversary next year. This is its 39th year, and originally it was just to take shows to schools that didn't have exposure to that. But within, I think, the last 10 or 5 years is when they started incorporating Spanish. And then these last 2 years is when they started making it 50% in Spanish and 50% in English.
That's amazing. How do you, as an actor, if at all, modulate or change the way you perform, given that you're performing for kids rather than adults?
So I've had to do that because sometimes the schools, even though we've told them that we only perform for elementary, they're like, oh, well, the middle school and the high schoolers are coming too. And in situations like that, it's very tough because a lot of them come in not caring or not wanting to watch the show. And they're like, yeah, so they're already writing us off from the beginning. So there is a little intro speech that we have at the beginning of the show where we explain everything. And we also tend to say, if you're an older student above the grade of 5th grade, we like you to put yourself in the mindset of a 3rd grader, 4th grader, so that you can enjoy this as well. But I have felt the shift in me, and like sometimes I don't make things as big as I usually would for a kid, because for a kid, like you try to make it as big because you're trying to keep them entertained for a good 50 minutes. And sometimes that's difficult, but I mean, we've succeeded for the most part with that. So I definitely would say that I tone it down for sure is what I usually do.
Yeah. And then as a performer, you know, how do you deal with an indifferent audience? Okay.
I usually just mentally prepare, and depending on how indifferent they are, whether it's older students or like they're all going to be white and like they might not understand what I'm saying. I just make a mental note for myself before like the show actually starts, because we give a little speech and then we go backstage because we have these little like wings that we create. And I just make a mental note. I close my eyes, and I'm religious, so like I always just do the sign of the cross before I go on stage, and just hope for the best.
I'm curious, can you think of a time or a story when you were like either feeling sad or angry or emotionally charged, and the show goes on, and like how you navigated that?
Yeah, there was one performance in Kansas where the students were not the best. And they, as soon as I came out and did my little Mexican grito, they started laughing. And I was like, oh, okay, this is one of those schools. And like the kids, like anytime we would speak Spanish, anytime that we would like do something that was like, you know, like for kids, like they would just like look at each other and like, and they'd start like whispering at each other and making jokes. And in that situation, I was getting very frustrated just because I was done with Kansas already. Like it was week 5. It was the second to last day before we had our last 2 performances. And I was just like done, and I was getting really angry actually. And I just like, I kept breathing, and I was like, I was getting to the point where I was trying to look at my stage manager to tell them to just cut the show. Cause like it was getting really bad. These kids were being very disrespectful. They kept laughing and they just kept cracking jokes. And it was at one point in the show that I just realized that they had stopped, and I was like, it's like, why did they stop? And I, you know, like you're performing, I'm not paying really much attention to them. And then I happened to glance over, and there had been a teacher who had sat down next to them, and they had quieted down. I was like upset and frustrated, but the teacher came over and she's like, thank you so much for what you do. She's like, you don't know how important it is to us, for the kids who do appreciate it. And I'm like, oh, there it is. It's not for me. It's for the kids. And like, and that's the only reason as well that I came back to do it this year, because last year there was a show where like we weren't going to do it because it had been like scheduling error, that they had said yes to it, but they forgot to put it in our schedule, so we didn't go. And so the school called, and they're like, hey, we were waiting for them, and they never showed up. And they're like, oh my God, this is our fault. We scheduled them, but we never updated their schedule, so they had no clue. They're like, is there anything we could do? We can make the performance for them today. And they were like, yes, of course, we would love to have them. And I was so glad that we had that performance, because I get to the school, we're setting up, we're talking to the principal, and he's asking us about the show and everything. I was like, yeah, it's like 50% in English, 50% in Spanish. He's like, oh my God. He's like, there's this boy who just got here within like a few weeks, and he doesn't speak a lick of English. And this show is going to be great for him. And he's like, oh, there he is, by the way. And he's like walking in, and like I see this little Mexican boy, just so sweet, so cute, just walking. And like he's like looking around, and like we start the show, we start speaking, and he looks a little confused that we're like saying a little bit of things in Spanish. And then the show starts, and I would start the show last year as well, and I would start with a whole verse of the first song in Spanish. And I just saw how this little boy just lit up. Like he just lit up. And the entire time I was fighting tears, because I was just like, I felt that because I lived that when I was in elementary school. I didn't speak English. And so like, I just saw myself in that kid, and I was just fighting tears the entire performance. And like my tour partner like looked at me, because like she's like, you're crying in parts, like you're usually not crying. Like she was so confused. And then she asked me at the end, she's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah. And like I was trying to talk to her, and I just couldn't. I was just bawling. And like I told her, I was like, yeah, it's just that little boy. I was like, as soon as I saw him light up when I spoke Spanish, I was like, it just touched my heart. And so that's why I did it again this year. And like I always try to remind myself as well. It's like it's for the kids. It's not for me. It's for the kids.
I'm connecting dots. So like the desire to be the first Latinx Phantom and Sweeney Todd, and being able to show up for this young person who is going through this difficult experience, and being able to be a lifeline of sorts. Like I perceive it as a source of pride, but I'm curious, like, is that something that like your family has talked a lot about, or you feel like is within your community, or is that like a really personal thing of like, I want to do this for us? Like, what does that come from?
It's a little bit of pride, and it's also that the last thing you just said, because like as growing up for me, like it was so funny, like going through school and going through college, whenever teachers would ask, they're like, what actor do you look up to, and like, or you see yourself as? And I would like always try to think, and like all the people that I would think were just white actors, you know? And like I was like, I don't know, like, and I would pick white actors, and like it wasn't until like doing the thing and like being out in the real world that I like realized, like I was like, dang. And it was a little bit in college that I like realized it as well. I was like, there's no one out there that I can look up to because I have to be that. And so like, in a way, it's like a little bit of pride. It's a little bit of an ego thing, but it's also like, I want to be that thing that someone can look up to and be like, whoa, I want to grow up to be that one day because I never had it, you know? And like, I'm getting emotional right now thinking about it, but like, it's just, it was difficult, you know, like trying to do this career and not having an actor to look up to. And it wasn't until this year as well, like, there was a company member who played the lead in the show that I was in Native Gardens. And he's Mexican, but he's also half white. But like, seeing him perform and seeing this man act, I was like, wow. And he's like in his 40s, he's 41. And I'm like, he's been doing, like, I asked him, I was like, how long have you been acting? He's like, I've been acting since I got out of college. And I was like, and like, you've been able to live off of it? And he's like, yeah. And like, after that day, like, I just started looking up to this man. And like, it was one time in karaoke, we were all drunk and high. And I was like talking to him. I was like, hey, I was like, is there any way that you could be my mentor? I was like, I would love to be something like you one day, where I could just look back and be like, man, I've done what I've loved. And like, I've been able to like not worry about food or like money and like have like a sustainable life, you know? And he's like, yeah, of course, man. Like, and like, him and I have hit it off, and like, he's like asked me to do little things here and there as like helping him out as well. And yeah, honestly, it's all a mixture of that like, I would love to be something that someone looks up to one day.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, do you experience that as like something that's like stressful, like pressure, like I have to, or is it like a motivating, inspiring thing? I imagine it probably changes by the day, but like,
yeah, it's a little bit of both for sure. It was very heartbreaking seeing that Phantom is closing on Broadway. And the amount of people who like texted me that day, they're like, did you hear? I was like, yeah, I heard. But it's like, I just want to be able to do it. And it's truly a motivation to like, whatever it is I end up doing, whether if I do end up on Broadway or if I do end up on TV or film, whatever it is, that I want to be like a motivator for somebody who like might have doubts, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. It was really cool to hear that part of your story. I want to change gears a little bit. Now you get to brag a little bit. Like, what aspects of you as a performer or actor do you think you are really good at? And if you're willing, I'd love to know, like, what parts feel like you are good at them because you've really worked at them and honed them, and which parts feel like it was just in me. Like, I just knew from day one this was something I was able to do.
I'm going to tie that in with like music as well. So for acting, it was like a process for sure. And the things that I've really honed in is like being able to get into that focal point of like, I'm not acting, I'm living in the moment. It's gotten easier and easier throughout the years. It wasn't something that I developed like just off the bat. It was something that I had to like consistently practice and whatnot. And I'm very proud of it now because like I could just like whenever I need to and like I hone in that moment, I can. And like if I don't try, like obviously it's not gonna happen. And the same goes for like music and stuff. Whenever it comes to being pitch accurate and harmonizations, I struggled with that a lot in high school. Even to the point where being called out in front of my whole entire class by a teacher and saying that I had pitch issues and that's why I wasn't going to be able to compete. And ever since then, I was like, nope, that's never going to happen to me again. And I'm never going to get embarrassed like that again. And so I just, whenever it comes to music or whenever it comes to harmonies, I like try to get them. But it's come to the point where like my ear has gotten so good with harmonizations that if I can hear it, it'll just happen. And sometimes for me, it's even more difficult to sing the harmony alone than it is to sing the harmony with the people that are also harmonizing with me.
Yeah. If I can, I want to dig a little deeper into that story you just shared. And here's the reason why, because there's two sides to it. So one is, you know, you had this what I would assume is a negative experience of being called out. And rather than saying like, fuck that, I'm never doing it again, you said like, nope, I'm going to get so good at that it never happens again. And so like there was your decision tree and you choosing that I'm going to pursue this. And then I get curious about the person who delivered that feedback. And I'm curious from your perspective, was that delivered from a place of meanness, or I don't quite have the right word, or from a place of like love of like, I want to see you succeed. And so I'm going to tell you where you're falling short, because I feel like that can have a big impact. So I'm just curious, like how you remember those two sides of it.
Yeah. I'll go from the perspective of the person. I think it was a mixture of both. That teacher was very like tough love. So like, I think that if she would have approached it in a different way, it would have been better. But her approaching it in front of the entire class definitely made it very hard.
Yeah.
To the point where like I like teared up, but I didn't show anybody that I cried, and I just stuck to myself, and I was very upset. But like ever since then, like I mean, I can only thank her, because she's what pushed me to like make sure that I never do that. Again, you know, and like you said, I could have gone the route where I'm like, oh, screw this, I'm not going to do this ever again. But instead I didn't. I decided to go on the path of like, nope, I'm going to get better at this. And it might stem from like my parents, because my parents have always told me never to give up. And they've always been people who fight hard, even though they fought me hard to pursue this career. Like they were like, no, you're not going to pursue this. You're going to end up living under a bridge, yada, yada, yada. And it wasn't until like,
mom and dad, thanks.
Yep. And it wasn't until I started getting voice lessons and like they started hearing and seeing like how I was like being like molded into what I am now. They were like, okay, we take you serious, and you have our support all the way.
That's awesome. Yeah, they're like, it's an interesting crucible, right? When like your family from a place of love and protection is like, hey, what if you didn't do this thing that's really risky and hard to succeed in and not the traditional path that we understand? And like, it just feels like you kind of have to wear them down over time, right? You just have to like show like, nope, like I'm still doing it. I still like it. I still want it. And at some point, like they do, speaking from limited data points, like if you keep doing it, even when it sucks, even when you fail, even when it's not the easy route, and you continue to be excited about it, it's almost like you can watch them chemically evolve, and start to show support. So I connect to that story very much.
Yeah, I know. And it was very difficult growing up, like wanting to do this, just because it was constant fights with my mom. And she always would say, nope, you're not going to do this. She's like, you better start focusing on something else. And it got even to the point when I was in college, like, she's like, the only way you're going to get this major is if you get a minor. And like, I really wanted to get the minor, but the minor was so demanding. I wanted to get a minor in marketing. And it was just like, it was all those accounting classes that was like piles of homework while I was trying to learn music, be in rehearsal, have voice lessons, have choir, and like it was just a lot. And like I was literally like killing myself, and I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna make the decision and I'm just gonna drop my minor. And I was completely terrified that my mom would find out, and she did find out, obviously. But I think I made the right decision, just because I wasn't able to give my attention fully to both of them, because they both demanded my full attention. And so I had to bite the bullet and pick one.
Yeah. That makes sense. And good for you for sticking with what you really wanted. Building on the question I was asking, so you identified like where you have a lot of strengths. What do you feel like is your next edge as an actor? Like, what's the next thing you feel like you really want to conquer or evolve into?
So this summer I took voice lessons with one of the accompaniment people, the pianist or the music director of one of the musicals here. And I took voice lessons with him, and I told him that I wanted to learn how to sing pop, because for me, pop is very difficult. I can sing all the classical stuff. I can sing all the musical theater stuff because it's very technical. And like, when it comes to pop, like, you don't hear that technique, and because like people usually don't have the technique. It's just like natural talent sometimes. And so like I was like, how can I get to this? And we were breaking through, and we got to the point where like we were singing pop-esque musical songs. And we did it. Like, he pointed it out to me, and it's just been hitting ever since. And it was just like a little placement thing whenever it came to singing. And like when you sing classical, like it's usually like you want to aim for the mustache area, like right below the nose and right above the teeth is where you want to hit it placement wise. You want to avoid the throat, want to have good breath support. When it comes to those pop songs, for me specifically, is what we found out is that I have to aim higher. And so it was aiming through the eyes, that it was just making it so that I wouldn't get throaty, I wouldn't get tight. And so like that's my new exploration, is trying to like lean more and more into the singing pop correctly, just because that's where Broadway and like all the musicals are leaning. They're leaning more towards pop-esque musical stuff. So I really want to hone those skills. I've honed a new skill from being in this tour. I learned how to puppeteer. So in the show, I had to learn how to puppeteer. And I've noticed that it's like a skill that I want to keep. And it's so much fun because in the show, so like I never got to tell you guys what it's about, but it's about a family who owns a restaurant and the grandmother dies. And so they're trying to figure out how to run the restaurant, and whether they should stick to the traditional stuff or incorporate new things and save more money and make more money. And so it's the constant battle of like what families go through. And so like I play the dad, I play his son and his little son, and the little son is the puppet. And so getting to do the puppet and everything, like I've gotten like sore from my hand and everything, but like it's gotten to the point where like I even shock myself because the puppet feels like it's alive by itself. And like sometimes I'm on stage and I look at him and like I feel like it's alive, and it's so weird how like I've developed that skill from like the rehearsal process to even going through all of tour. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Let me jump back for a second because I want to make sure. So when you were describing those two areas, if I'm hearing you right, like that's where you experience the vibration of your singing when you're doing those different types of music. And you were saying for the more classical musical theater, it was like right below the nose on the upper lip. And then for the more pop stuff, it was like the mask, like the eyes, the forehead area.
Yeah.
Super cool. All right. I have a few like technical tip oriented questions, and then I will give you the rest of your Saturday back. So thank you for defining repertory, by the way, because I totally wouldn't have known. But so now like you're doing two shows on the same day. Like I imagine you've had to memorize a lot of lines over your acting career. What advice would you offer for people who are trying to learn lines? And maybe this will resonate, maybe it won't. I am learning that like there is memorization and then there's stage memorization. And stage memorization to me means like you can be observing what's happening in the crowd. You can be aware of your other person on stage and still be in memorization. And then there's the simpler version of like when I'm just alone in a room, I can do it. But doing it with all those distractions and those other textures, like that's just a different level. So any tips you have, I would love to hear.
So when it comes to memorization, I tend to like be very, I say majority of us as performers are very good at it just because it's one of the things you start learning from like the beginning. And it's truly just about sitting down and doing the work. For me, the way I personally memorize is I read it all the way through, like at least 4 or 5 times. And then I leave it alone for a day, come back to it, read it again 4 or 5 times. And then that day I'll start to memorize. So what I'll do is I'll read the first line, second line, third line, and I'll read them over and over again. And then I'll read them by covering them up, and then I'll see if I can get it. And if I do, I move on. And so then I learn the next 3 lines. But what I do is I go from the beginning. I say those 3 lines from the beginning and then those next 3 lines. And then if I mess up, I start over and do it again. And if not, I keep going. Another technique that I know that works a lot for people is writing the first letter of each word in a monologue, specifically for a monologue. So when you're learning a monologue, you do what I said is like read it over 5 times. And then after you've read it, you write the first letter of each word in a little piece of paper. And then you go through and you try to figure out what those words are. And if you get them, that's usually how it sticks as well. For stage memorization, for some people, it's definitely like writing down the notes and like doing the thing. For me, I like to write down what my stage directions are on specific lines and stuff. And then like it's the consistency of repetition that it just sticks, and it's just muscle memory for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So next question, if you could go back to like you in high school when you were, cause like, that to me, again, when it was West Side Story, it sounds like that's when you were kind of like, okay, I got to try out. I got to step into this. I got to lean in. Mm-hmm. Like, what advice would you give to that version of yourself or someone who is in kind of that stage in their acting journey?
Pick up an instrument.
Go on.
Pick up an instrument for sure. Like, learn how to play the piano, learn how to play the guitar, whatever it is. Like, have more than just singing, dancing, and acting. Like, have more in your belt. Like, and especially in like that time, because it's just, you're not busy. You're not worried about work. You're just worried about school. And so if you could do it when you're younger, do it when you're younger. Like, learn how to play the guitar, learn how to play the piano. Like, if you don't want to learn either of those two, learn how to play the ukulele, learn how to play the violin, whatever it is, just learn how to play an instrument along with doing what you're doing as well.
Amazing. That was not what I was expecting, but I love that answer. So now, like, say there's a person who's late 20s, they're not happy in their career. They've always been curious about acting, but like a lot of people, I think you wouldn't know where to start. Like, what advice would you give to that person about like either how to start exploring or even how to think about, like, I want to say breaking in. I don't know if that's quite the right term, but like starting to shift toward acting, or even a way to just test out, is this really something I want to do? Yeah,
for sure. It's never too late. That's truly the answer. It's never too late. The way that I would feel like if they would want to explore and see if they wanted to actually do it would be taking acting classes, taking voice lessons if they wanted to be a musical theater person or not, and then auditioning for a community theater. Like, do it for free. And if you're willing to do it for free, then you could do it paid.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes so much sense. I could probably ask you a billion more questions, but I will let you off the hook. Brandon, this was a joy. Thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your story. Where can people find you? How can they learn more about you? Is there any project coming up they should be looking for?
Yeah, so I am on SoundCloud. I am on Instagram and Facebook. My Instagram is Brandon Guzman 13. And there's a link there to my link tree that has my Spotify for the Guava Tree, which was the musical that I was in last year. And there's also a link there for my SoundCloud, which has all my music. The recording for Casa Alfonsa will be released within the next 2 months. I recorded that today, and that will be also up on Spotify, and I'll eventually update that on my link tree as well.
Very cool. Do you have any rap coming out anytime soon?
Yes, I have that one song that I'm working with my friend, and I don't know when that will be released, but I will be featured in their album or their EP on Spotify.
Amazing. Well, Brandon, thank you again. This was so wonderful. And maybe I'll see your show because you're in the same state. So who knows?
Yeah.
I'll sneak into a school in a not creepy way.
Yeah, hopefully. No, let me know. I have a few shows in Colorado, but we can stay in contact and I can update you for sure if you'd like to come and see the show.
I would love that. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Stage Dive, and I hope that you enjoyed it. New episodes drop each and every Wednesday. You can find highlights and clips of these conversations on TikTok and Instagram using the handle @StageDivePodcast. If you have any questions for us, want to be featured on the show, or have anything else to send, you can always email us at stagedivepodcast@gmail.com. This is Jack Dawkins, and no matter how you're performing in the world today, I want you to know that you are loved. Take care.